myself so that way y'all can see my face. And then whenever I actually go into the presentation, I'm going to turn my camera viewing off so that I can fully focus on the presentation. But my name is Katelynne Gonzales. I am the Advocacy and Counseling Manager with formerly the Texas Forensic Nurse Examiners. But as we have grown and just expanded services, we quickly realized that taking on Texas wasn't just the end of it. So we have added, of course, we've always had advocacy, but we've added adult forensic interviewing services and counseling services to our long list of services that we provide. And so now we are Texas Forensic Nurse Examiners, the Forensic Center of Excellence. It's a mouthful, but we are fully embracing this change, and it's really exciting with all the different things that we've kind of accomplished throughout this past year and going on into this new year. So a little bit about the agency. So we started, our CEO and founder, Dr. Kara Breeden, recognized that in the realm of forensic nursing, that there was a need for better quality services and more accessible services to our survivors that were going to the hospital, trying to seek care and just simply either weren't getting it or weren't getting it in a manner that was trauma-informed and victim-centered. And so she set out on a mission, put boots to the pavement, and created this agency to help eliminate those gaps in services and really advocate for that intersection between, because forensic nursing is an intersection between advocacy, between law enforcement, between healthcare. And so really trying to meet our patients' needs as they were arising. And so if y'all have any questions about the agency and our growth and anything like that, I am going to be after kind of towards the end or kind of hang around, and y'all are welcome to ask. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Maybe. Okay, so maybe not. It's not allowing me to.
Oh, hold on. Let me try now.
Nope. It's telling me that I can't.
There you go. I've made you a co-host. When you hit that green button, what happens on share screen?
It is, my computer is telling me that it's not allowed. Let me,
hold on.
It's not a true Zoom meeting without technical.
Yeah, we gotta, hold on.
Okay, so. Oh, I think it's the recording that is throwing it off. That's making it.
Oh, okay. Try this. What happens now?
All right, let's see. Okay. So I think I should be able to now. Aha. I got this.
Do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. It was having a fit because of the recording, but I got it. All right, so we got this. Like I said, it's not a true Zoom meeting without technical difficulties. Okay, so like I said, my name is Katelynne Gonzales, and I am the Advocacy and Counseling Manager for TXFNE. And to kind of talk about the advocacy, like the actual accompaniment portion of it, I'm going to tag in my other advocate, Vanessa, so she can kind of talk about what that advocacy accompaniment is like. But yeah, so we are going to go ahead and just jump in. So some of the things that we're going to talk about are understanding what the role of a forensic nurse examiner is, because being at an agency that started at its foundation to expand forensic nursing services, I have a unique perspective just being an advocate for the agency on what exactly our forensic nurses do, because I think that it's been kind of that weird, strange thing whenever we go into the hospital and the nurse steps in, we're like, well, we have no idea what is about to happen. And so, working with all of our incredible nurses, I've really gotten to really understand what that role is from at its core. And then we're going to talk a little bit about like what a forensic nurse exam is. We're of course going to be talking about trauma-informed advocacy, establishing rapport and safety. And then of course the big one is how COVID-19 has impacted all of the advocacy and accompaniment services this past year and going into this year. All right, so I want to talk about that word that we all use whenever referring to our nurses, that quote unquote sane nurse. So we get into a habit of referring to them as sane nurses, but just calling them sane nurses really minimizes their vast role. So sane specifically means sexual assault nurse examiner. But when we restrict it by that verbiage, what does that leave out? Well, it leaves out all of this. So there is a definition by Scope and Standards for forensic nursing, and it is the specialized care that focuses on patient populations affected by violence and trauma across the lifespan and in diverse practice settings. Forensic nursing includes education, prevention, and detection of treatment of the effects of violence in individuals, families, communities, and populations. And so through leadership and interprofessional collaboration, the forensic nurse works to foster an understanding of the health effects, interventions, and prevention of violence and trauma in the United States and throughout the world. And so that is what a forensic nurse does, not just the sexual assault nurse examining part of it, but all of this. They have the knowledge and education on sexual assault nurse examining, interpersonal violence. They see patients that have suffered from elder abuse, human trafficking, child abuse. They provide the legal nurse consulting. So whenever that case goes to court, they're the ones that can be subpoenaed to come and testify on behalf of that exam and do expert witnessing about the forensic examination process. And so really their role doesn't just end at during that hospital examination. It can go into so many different, it's so multidimensional. And so why is this important? Well, this is important because if we're going to provide collaborative care with our nurses, with law enforcement, with whoever, we must know what our partners are doing. And we must be able to understand their role and help them understand our roles for that more holistic care. So what does a medical forensic exam look like? So in a room full of advocates, why is this important? Because I'm sure some of y'all are like, well, we're not doing the medical forensic exam, so why do we need to know what happens? Well, it's important because we're not forensic nurses. And if we as lay people don't understand it, how can we expect our victims and survivors to understand it on the worst day of their lives while they're still in active trauma? And undoubtedly, some of us, while we've been on these hospital accompaniments, before the nurse comes in or before the nurse gets there, we may have our patients ask, what is going to happen to me? Or they'll say, I watched Law and Order SVU, or I had a friend of a friend who said that this happened to her. And we may need to step in and say, that's not exactly what happens, and help give a generalized, have a generalized understanding of what exactly is going to happen throughout that process. And so the way that I've kind of set this up on the slide is this is actually the way that our nurses communicate this process to our patients. And so the medical forensic exam is divided up essentially into 7 parts. It always begins with the informed consent. And this process is important because it is one of the first moments where they have the opportunity to reclaim control of their body and their circumstances, choosing whether or not they want this evidence collection to happen, whether or not they want the examination to happen. And so it's empowering to be able to have that choice. The next part to the history is more important. Next to the informed consent is one of the absolute most important parts of this, is because it is the survivor's story. It is what happened to them, and it's, you know, it's verbatim. It is word for word, and we like to say every but or swear word that they say gets included in this history, because it is helping law enforcement and prosecutors know exactly where the survivor was at in that moment when they were telling their story. And so the next is the head to toe physical examination. So literally it is from the tip of their heads to the tips of their toes, just evaluating their body to make sure that their body is okay. And that's really what the entire purpose of the medical forensic exam is to make sure that their bodies are safe and that they're healthy. And so then, of course, is the anogenital exam. And this part of the exam, you know, no matter how trauma informed, any of us ladies who have ever been for our well woman's checks know how uncomfortable it is for us to go in for that type of visit. Imagine what our clients and patients are going through whenever they're having to sit through this for evidence collection, or to make sure that they don't have any injuries or haven't been hurt. And so it can be very traumatizing, no matter how trauma informed these services are being provided. And so it can be very scary. And so, you know, reassuring our victims and survivors that, you know, yes, it is a scary process, but, you know, our nurses are there to take care of you, and, you know, we're here for you if you need to process or talk about it after. Then, of course, is the evidence collection. Now, evidence, I think per state mandate, for an acute examination where evidence can be collected is within a 120-hour period following the assault, be it physical or sexual assault. And so between that assault date or that assault time and 120 hours, that's considered an acute examination. Following that 120 hours, it's called a non-acute examination. And so they can still come in for a medical forensic exam if it's in that non-acute stage. It's just they may not have the opportunity for evidence collection following that time period or that cutoff. Now, it still has value, even if this number five or fifth step isn't available. Again, the purpose of the medical forensic exam isn't for number five. And I think that that's been a common misconception for individuals who aren't nurses, so like all of us, because that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is for medical treatment and diagnosis of that assault, or for that assault. And so we're wanting to, again, make sure that that victim's body is okay. 5 just comes with it if it's in that time frame. And so next is the number 6, so the STI testing and prophylaxis. And so this is where our nurses will treat for any risk of infections or you know, anything that they may have been exposed to following or during the assault. And then, of course, number 7, so safety planning and discharge. So our nurses and advocates work together to ensure that our patients are safe, or our patients and victims are safe. And so this is so important, because oftentimes, you know, we don't really rely or collaborate with our nurses for safety planning, but there's so much that follows the medical forensic exam. So where can they go for safe treatment if they're needing like the follow-up STI medications, or if they're needing follow-ups and they still live with an abuser? Where can they go that's safe and discreet for them to be able to get those services? Or, you know, if they are needing shelter in that moment, where can the nurse like discharge them, and where can the advocate send them that is a safe location for them to go? And so this is a collaborative piece of, or component of the examination, where we really as advocates have the opportunity to work with the nurses and with our survivors to make sure that we're coming up with a care plan or a safety plan that is the most beneficial and the safest for our survivors. Okay, so this next slide is purely for fun. It really is, if I'm being honest. So one of my roles here at the agency is also evidence release. And because it is a common misconception that medical forensic exams are purely for the evidence, I thought I would throw this fun thing in there. And I would like in the comments for y'all to take a guess at what each of these things are. So obviously they are evidence, and number 1 and number 2 are probably going to be pretty familiar, but I want y'all to take the opportunity to guess what types of evidence these things are. Just take a moment. Okay. So, number 1 is probably the easiest one because that's the one that we work with the most, right? Everybody knows what a sexual assault kit is. Everybody. Whether you've seen it on SVU or you've gone to a hospital accompaniment and you've seen it and seen the nurse open it. Of course, the first one is the standard sexual assault kit. And oftentimes accompanied with the sexual assault kit is number 2. It's a drug facilitated sexual assault kit. So in the instance that a substance or anything was used to incapacitate the survivor in any way, blood and urine, of course, can be collected to just check and see like whether or not a substance was used. Number 3 is something that we probably will never see unless for some strange reason we have an offender come to we have an offender come into the hospital to get this service done while our victim is there, which I'm sure it's happened in some realm. But number 3 is actually a suspect examination kit. So our nurses can provide suspect examinations. Most of the time there has to be a warrant of that person, like on that person's body. So that way, because most aren't going to consent willfully to having evidence collected on their body if they are being suspected as an offender. And so that is a suspect examination kit. And then number 4. So number 4 is really truly the reason why I really advocate for advocates to stop referring to forensic nurses as sane nurses, because again, sane nurse specifically means sexual assault nurse examiner. Well, number 4 is a domestic violence evidence collection kit. And so I'm wondering how many, and you can let me know in the comments if you like, how many of y'all knew that there was even a type of evidence collection kit for domestic violence. And so most people don't know. I've had law enforcement come in to pick up some of these kits and they're like, what is this? And I'm like, well, it's for domestic violence. It's it's a better look at, injury or at bruising, at strangulation. And you can also take DNA evidence on the neck. So swabbing the neck for any DNA that may have been left behind during a strangulation incident. And so there's also domestic violence evidence that can be collected. And so it's really important to, again, know what different types of things are out there and what our survivors are going through. All right, so now the stuff that everybody's been waiting for, the advocacy bit, right? So I think that everyone has their own reasons for getting into advocacy work. When growing up, quote unquote advocate doesn't really fall in line with childhood aspirations of being an astronaut, being president, a ballet dancer, or for me, the Red Power Ranger. I think it's safe to say that most people don't just wake up one morning and decide, you know what I want to do? I want to work with trauma. Most of us that do this work have either first or second-handedly experienced trauma in some way and have made a conscious choice to devote our work to supporting others. We have made a choice with this devotion to our work and with this devotion to our work, we all carry some personal definition of what advocacy means to us. And this definition, of course, if you just Google Google the definition of advocacy, this is obviously not that definition, but rather this is my definition. And through my experience and through my work as an advocate, this is what I believe advocacy is. And that's through empowerment and empathy. We're able to holistically provide culturally appropriate resources and support that help promote healing and meet the victim survivors' needs as they disclose them. So meeting them where they're at, and really collaborating with them and with our partners to make sure that we're providing that trauma-informed care. Okay, so everyone knows or has heard the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so kind of like we were talked about in the last slide, most of us have gotten into this work because of some exposure to trauma, be it personal or secondhanded. And we always want to make sure that we're in a good place to take care of our survivors. But if we're still experiencing active trauma ourselves, then it's really hard for us to be able to be wholly present with our survivors. And so the first thing that I always advise people to do whenever they're entering into an advocacy role is check yourself. Right. And so my little rhyme that I have in my head is check your space, check your face, check your body and your mind. And so that's just kind of what I replay in my head all the time. Anytime I'm about to enter into be it an accompaniment or law enforcement accompaniment, whatever it is, those are the things that I check myself for. And so the first one is check your space. So am I in a safe space to be able to support others? Am I healed am I healed enough to be able to support them without letting my own stuff kind of impact the way that I provide that quality of care? And some of the ways that you can help with just checking yourself and making sure that you're in a good space is, of course, that amazing word, self-care. But I am a bit of a snob when it comes to self-care because often whenever people talk about self-care, they kind of just throw random fun things around, right? It's, oh, like I like mani-pedis, I like watching Netflix, and that's great. But self-care isn't just randomly doing fun or calming things. Self-care must be intentional. Self-care is meant to replenish those energy reserves that you have given up during the course of your day or given to others through the course of your day, through your work, for family, for whoever or whatever it may be. It's meant to replenish. And so I'm sorry, I don't know who needs to hear this, but binge watching The Night Stalker on Netflix is not self-care. I'm sorry, it is not. And so it's important that we find things that, again, are intentional and meant to help bring us up whenever we've like I said, given up parts of ourselves throughout the day. So the next part is, of course, checking your face. Now, some people carry stress in different ways, and I am that person that whenever I'm stressed, you can read it all over my face. My emotions are in my face. I have a problem with checking my facial expressions. And so if you're upset, if you're angry, if you're worried, sad, scared, whatever it is, that is going to be apparent on your face. And if you come off as having even RBF, those of you, if any of you have ever been told that y'all have RBF, y'all know that it's important to check your face to make sure that you're not coming across as like you don't want to be there or that you don't want to be in support of them. And that same thing goes for checking your body. If you have your arms crossed, if you are standing up while that patient or client is sitting down.
Okay, we did it. Good job. Thank you.
Oh. Sorry. Okay, so if you're standing up over the client's bed or over the patient's bed while they're laying down, you may come across as like menacing, or it may be scary for that patient for you to be in that space. And And so it's important to check your body and your face to make sure that, you know, you're not coming across as like mean or that you can't or untrustworthy. And then the last thing is always be growth minded. So we don't know what we don't know. And I think that throughout my experience working with survivors, I honestly and genuinely feel like I learn something new every single day. And it makes me a better advocate. It makes me a better human being. And so it's important that we continue that hunger for knowledge and for growth and continue pushing ourselves to be the best advocates and professionals that we can be. And so if someone comes up to you and says, hey, you know, the way that you said this, it really hurt my feelings and it really made me feel like I couldn't trust you. It's important to not take that as a personal hit, but to rather take that as an opportunity for growth. I always like to say, I never make mistakes. I always make learning experiences, right? And so some of these opportunities that we have may come off as, oh, darn, like I did this and it sucks and I completely blew it. But rather than seeing it that way, I'm wondering how beneficial it would be to change that mindset to rather challenge it as being or change it to being a learning experience. All right, so next we're going to go into trauma-informed advocacy. So trauma-informed care really takes root in the system providing the service itself. And in that system, they're promising to uphold trauma-informed services. And that means that at your agency's core, you as a unit believe in putting the victim first and continue to respect that individual's cultural beliefs, respect their healing journey if they're ready to heal. And always continue to educate yourself on new research on how trauma impacts the brain and body and trauma developments, continuing that education again from the last slide, continuing that hunger for knowledge and growth. And part of trauma-informed advocacy is empowering and believing the survivor to help remove self-blame and help discover, you know, what choices they have. And an informed decision is the best decision because then they have all of the options and all of their things laid out for them to make the best choice that best fits them. And then educating the survivor with information or referrals, including community resources and partners. So sometimes we provide accompaniment services for survivors who aren't from the area. We had a survivor go to HCA Clear Lake a long time ago who actually lived in like Austin or San Marcos. And so, but you know, for some reason they found themselves in this area. And so, you know, we could always provide, of course, local resources for that, but that doesn't really benefit them in any way because they don't live here. And so making sure that we're, you know, providing those accessible resources for them from the area that is most, or that is closest to them. And then providing the survivor with a We Care package, and that can include a resource folder, a blanket, clothing, and toiletries, but also snacks and water. But it's always important to remember that if you're going to offer snacks and water, always, always, always check with the nurse first. Because if there was any like oral penetration or if anything went in their mouth, it's important that the nurse goes ahead and collects evidence if they're within that evidence collection window prior to them consuming any liquids or food. And then this providing a We Care package and providing food, and that is also a part of just making sure that their basic needs are being met. If they're cold, give them a blanket. If they're hungry, offer them that food and water with the nurse with before or after asking the nurse, and just making sure that they feel like they're supported and that they're okay. And part of our We Care packages that we've started providing, we've actually started providing Play-Doh. And Play-Doh is a really fascinating resource to use because stress balls just they're just not quite enough. You know, it's one thing to squish a ball, you know, every now and then, but there's something just very satisfying about that tactile sensation of playing with Play-Doh and being able to mold something and control, the shape of something. And so I recommend Play-Doh for all ages, children, adults, everybody. It's just been really, our survivors have really liked that. The next is providing appropriate crisis intervention and trauma-informed support. So serving as a liaison between nursing, family, and law enforcement. So again, we're wanting that collaborative care to make sure that all of our survivors' needs are being met. And then of course, the next, supporting survivors with mental health concerns and advocating for fair treatment. So I get told this a lot, that depending on the status of the mental health of our survivors, it can be difficult to provide services. But think of how terrifying it must be for that survivor, one who has just experienced sexual or physical violence, but also has voices in their head telling them that, they should kill themselves, or having those voices in their heads like that are constantly screaming at them, telling them all of these different things. How terrifying it must be from that side too. And so I am here to say that even our survivors with mental health concerns still deserve that fair treatment and still deserve that support. Even if it's just us sitting there and being present with them, they may not be able to receive, counseling services, or may not be able to receive some of the other additional supportive care. But we can still be present with them, and we can still support them in that hospital visit or in that clinic visit during that exam, because of how traumatizing that experience can be and how emotionally exhausting it can be. All right, so going into the good stuff, the accompaniments. So I am going to hand it over to our advocate, Vanessa, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the accompaniment process. So because we have different settings that we perform examinations in, so we also have hospital partners that we go and do exams at, but we also have clinic spaces. So outside of the hospital setting, it's a little more trauma informed, a little quieter. And so we're going to kind of break those down to tell y'all kind of what that process is between the two. But I am going to hand it over to Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Like Katelynne said, my name is Vanessa. I'm one of the advocates here at Texas Forensic Nurse Examiners. For the next 2 slides, I'm going to be talking about accompaniments at the hospital and at the clinics. But before I start that, I just wanted to go over some personal experiences that I feel like is going to be in common with some of the advocates, especially the ones that are, working from home. So before starting here at Texas FNE, I'm as an advocate, I took a gap. So I was not working as an advocate before, but before that, I worked as an advocate in another center. And so coming back from that gap in between advocacy, I think is truly, I had to go over everything. So especially the accompaniments at the hospitals and at the clinics. So it's something that I had to familiarize myself with, the procedures, the steps. And even though at the previous advocacy center, I had done all this, it took me some time, I had to familiarize myself again, especially because, again, it can be daunting going into a hospital and, just remembering all the steps that you have to do. So I'm going to go over some of the steps for you that I follow when going to the hospital and going with the clinic at our clinic settings. So one of the first things that I like to do is to find out what room the victim or survivor is in. Some hospitals have designated rooms, others don't. So it's always good to talk to that charge nurse. And it's especially important to speak with that charge nurse to see, get some information on the patient, like the name, who's there, especially who's there with the patient. Many of our patients come accompanied by family members, friends, but there are some instances where sometimes the suspect may be accompanying them. So it's always good to know, get a brief view as to what's going on inside that room. And if in some cases, like if the suspect is with the victim or survivor, we will always like to come up with a plan. And sometimes that includes, taking the survivor out of the room, and the explanation that we would give would be like, oh, we're just taking her to get some additional testing. And if that's not the case, then you always go inside the room and introduce yourself to the survivor. And then you explain your role as what the advocate role entails and what it involves. And you speak with them, speak with any of the family members. And, I think this is an important step to ask if they have any questions as to what the forensic nurse examiner does, answer some of those questions. And then we want to get into providing them some blankets, especially that Play-Doh if they need it. And the food and water is especially important to talk to that forensic nurse examiner first before we give them any of the food and water, because we don't if they are wanting to get some of the evidence collection, we don't want to do something that's not going to be able to for them to collect that evidence. And then one of the next things we do is to see if the survivor wants to report to law enforcement. So we always inform her that she does have choices. If she does want to report to law enforcement, we always call the nearest reporting location. And if she's not wanting to report, we always, again, inform them that, of the non-report process and how long evidence can be collected. So, or if they don't want to report but still want the evidence collected, we inform them of what that process is. And again, knowledge is power. So that's one of the big reasons that advocates should be, well aware of all that information. That way that survivor has all that information with them. And the next process is like sometimes the forensic nurse at this point will be in the room with us as well. And at this point, if we always offer the survivor a chance for them to have the advocate in the room while they're doing the history process or the forensic exam. But if they don't want us in the room, we always want to make sure that they do have a safe place to go after the exam. So at this point, I always like to ask them about their safety at home. So if they don't want me during the exam, I can always step out and at this time make the preparations to get them into a shelter center. And if they do want me during the exam, I'm always there for them. It's especially important to provide them with a lot of support, a lot of encouragement, let them know that they're being really, really brave, because again, this is as much as our nurses make this such a trauma-informed process, it is still traumatic. So it's always important to let them know how brave they are, how strong they are, because this takes a lot of courage. And then at the end of the examination, we always want to provide them with the care package that includes clothing, hygiene products. Some of these survivors haven't been able to brush their teeth, have a clean set of clothes. So it's always important to give those out. That way they can have that after the exam. And then we go over supportive services and information. Again, it is their choice whether or not they want to know about some of these resources. And if they do want to know more about these resources, we try to give them an overview, but we don't want to try to overwhelm them with too much information. That's why we use those follow-up calls to follow up with them. And again, it's very important to let them know that you're here to support them during the interview and as well as after the exam. And let me go ahead and go next to the accompaniments at clinic. So as Katelynne was saying, we do have our clinic-based accompaniments, and those are a little bit different than the hospitals. One of the reasons they're different is we have, especially in this clinic at Richmond, we have soft rooms where we do the initial history of the survivor, and then we bring them into our forensic exam room. And so it's very trauma informed, it's very comfortable rooms, we have blankets, we have the Play-Doh, and we always make it as comfortable as for the survivor as it should be. So with our clinic-based exams, we always want to coordinate with the forensic nurse to see what time the patient will be arriving at the clinic. We always want to make sure that we have some type of demographic information, and then have that room ready for the survivor when she comes in. So when the survivor arrives, again, it's gonna kind of be in common with the hospital, what we do. So again, we want to introduce ourselves, let them know our role, what our role is, and especially a lot of them don't know what advocates mean. So again, let them know our role, that we're there to support them, and the different things that we can do, such as law enforcement accompaniments, court accompaniments, and again, we want to try to meet their basic needs. So with the water, the food, the blanket, and again, with the water and the food, we always make sure that the nurses give the okay before we do that. And again, we want to go ahead and see if the survivor wants to report to law enforcement. And if they don't, we always want to make sure that we support their choices. But again, we always want to make sure that they have the knowledge as to what reporting can be like, and what reporting, not reporting can be like as well. And so again, we coordinate with law enforcement to come and take the report if they do want to report. And then after that, we want to make sure that they have assessed for safety. So they have a safe place to go after this. So we always coordinate with our shelter centers to see if they do need that safe place to go after. We always want to, at this point, we want to make sure that they do have a safe place to go after this. And again, if they do want us to stay in during the exam, that is a possibility. So if they want us to stay in the room with them, we always let them know, hey, you know, this is a possibility. And again, we always want to assess body language, because some of them might be like, yes, but they're feeling like, you know, you can tell by their body language that they might not be comfortable with. So it's always, you know, let them know the choices that is going to be okay, whether or not you want them in the room. You know, you can always check with them after the examination ends and provide those resources, clothing, the hygiene products, and the nurses are awesome. So, you know, the encouragement is always there. Okay, so.
Alrighty. So just kind of touch on some of the, because like I said, we do have our clinic spaces. And so those of you who aren't familiar with our different clinic spaces, so we have seven clinic spaces, and the most recent one, shout out to Bay Area Turning Point, we just set up a clinic at their crisis center, and so we have a clinic at the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, at the Montgomery County Public Health Office building up in Conroe. We have one in Sugar Land. We of course have our main office off of Richmond and Kirby here in Houston, and then we also have a clinic at Children's Safe Harbor. So we do their child sexual assault examinations at their facility, one at the Wharton Crisis Center, and then of course the newest one at Bay Area Turning Point. And so if y'all have any questions or would like any information on our clinic spaces, just send me an email or stick around afterwards, and I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have. So, COVID-19 in the world of teleadvocacy. So just a brief story. So we had a mom call our hotline about her 6-year-old daughter who was assaulted and it was an acute examination, so within 120 hours. So she did all of the things. She took her daughter to the hospital, and when she got to the hospital, they turned her away. And they turned her away due to the high volume of COVID patients that were waiting in the lobby. And so that is one of the barriers that our survivors are encountering, is not being able to access services because of COVID. But luckily, you know, we were able to refer her to one of our clinics. I think we actually wound up referring her to the Bridge, and we're able to get them connected with services even throughout, you know, this time of COVID. And so having access to hospital services has been a barrier. And so because of all of this, you know, we've really had to adapt those supportive services to help serve survivors. And so some of the benefits of of COVID-19 is it's really helped us break out of our shells and has helped us think of new and more advanced and different ways to meet clients' needs via electronic communication. And so that concept of tele-advocacy, being able to provide services over the phone, even throughout this pandemic, has really been beneficial, so that we can still meet those clients' needs just in a different way. But one of the barriers is that we as a society, we weren't ready to make those changes, not as quickly as we had to. And so we really had to improvise and just figure out kind of in the moment what exactly that looked like. And so we at our agency, we use an app called UMA. And it's basically an app where we can call and text from it's a work phone, but it's linked to our cell phones. So that way it's accessible, but it's still not us calling from our personal numbers. And so that's the software that we've been using to provide the telecommunication or electronic communication services. And then the other thing that's changed is accompaniments. And so a lot of agencies still aren't offering the face-to-face accompaniments or the in-person accompaniments, be it at the hospital or the clinic. Some agencies have changed that more recently to where they are, but it does change the way that we do it. Now, whenever we go into the hospital, we're having to make sure that we're, sanitizing and putting on that protective wear, making sure that our masks are secure, making sure we're maintaining those that 6 feet. But that can seem really impersonal, and it's hard to read somebody's face who's saying, hey, I'm here to support you and I'm here to provide care, when you can't see all of their face. And so, and some people may challenge, well, Katelynne, you said that part of, checking yourself was checking your face. Well, yes, it's even more important to check your face with a mask on, because we emote so many emotions through our eyes. And so it's still important to check your face. Even when you think that that mask is covering up the different parts of your face, your eyes are visible. And it's important to still check your face, even in that moment. And then it limits who can be present and supporting the survivor. So those individuals who want their mom in the room, or want their sister or their friend or that supportive person in the room, it really limits who can be there, because, of course, the hospitals and even at our clinics, we don't want people exposing staff or exposing our survivors, and all of those different dynamics of how the virus can spread. And so some of the things that we've noticed just during this this time of COVID is that the need for shelter has increased. Our violent crimes has increased drastically during this time, and the cases have seemingly gotten more violent and just really more awful, as crazy as that sounds. And so part of that too is making sure that we're prepared to see those things. And part of doing hospital accompaniments and medical accompaniments is preparing to hear these stories, whether we're hearing it on the phone or we're hearing it in person. We're still going to be experiencing this traumatic time with our survivors. And so yeah, it's been a lot. And trying to adapt ourselves to all of these changes, and then trying to support survivors through these adapted changes can be pretty challenging at times. So just to kind of sum it up, so we kind of talked about what the medical forensic piece looks like, what advocacy looks like, how COVID has impacted everyone. But I wanted to kind of turn it back to everyone and just kind of see what were some of the things that stood out to you. What are some of the things that or challenges or barriers that y'all have faced through COVID, and just any experiences that y'all have had with accompaniments, and see if y'all would like to kind of talk about it or share. Anybody?
I had a question.
Sure.
If that's okay. So it's interesting, when I started out doing accompaniments, we would be in the room and trying to figure, it was